There is a certain kind of tap on the shoulder, 2 knuckles, light and patient, and when a customer does it in my shop, I have to set down whatever I am holding before I let myself turn around. My name is Owen Kessler. I am 53 years old, and I run a mountain outfitter's shop in central Colorado. Ropes and stoves and sleeping bags rated for cold I hope my customers never meet. The tap comes from one night in January, the year I turned 25, when 4 of us kept ourselves alive in an abandoned fire watch cabin by playing a walking game in the dark. The game has a rule that makes it impossible for 4 people to play more than 1 round without stopping, and that night it ran from full dark to first light without breaking once. It took us until a diner booth the next afternoon to say out loud what that meant, and I have spent 28 years since trying to unknow it. I want to lay the whole night out in order, the way I have never really done, because the order is the only thing that makes it tellable. We were nobody special, and I can prove that fast. The 4 of us had come up through the same college outdoor club on the Front Range, and we kept climbing together after graduation the way some people keep a poker night going. Deke was the oldest at 27, a lab tech with a beard he was proud of, raised in mining country on the western slope, with an uncle who had stood watch shifts in cold places his whole life. Marcy was 24, quiet in town and downright chatty above 10,000 feet, and she carried the map because she was the only one of us who had never once dropped it. Fitz was 23, an engineering grad who counted everything, stairs, switchbacks, calories, and he could tell you at any hour how many miles were left, whether you had asked or not. I was the gear guy, 25, working at the shop I would one day buy, which meant I carried the newest stove and the oldest boots of anybody on the trip. In the second week of January, we set out to walk a 3-day ridge traverse in the north end of the Colorado Rockies, a route Deke had done twice in summer and never in winter. I am not going to name the ridge, partly for the sake of the people who walk it now, and partly because I do not care to say its name with the lights off. The forecast gave us a 2-day window of high pressure, and the window was real, and our mistake was believing that a window in January stays open on schedule. The first day was the kind you bank and spend for years, blue shadows on windboard, a crust that held our snowshoes, ere so still the cold felt like a held breath. We camped that night in the last trees below the saddle, and Deke boiled water and told Uncle stories, and I laughed hard enough to drop my headlamp in the snow. I hold on to that picture of the 4 of us because it is the last one from that trip I can look at straight. The second day went wrong before noon. The stillness broke with a wind out of the northwest that arrived like a decision. No gusts first, no warning, just a steady press that bent the stunted trees one way and kept them there. Marcy called out that the pressure was falling faster than the forecast had any right to allow, and Deke looked at the sky for a long minute and turned us around. We were maybe 2 miles past the point where turning around still helped. The cloud came up the west side of the ridge like water filling a tub, and when it reached us, it did not feel like fog, it felt like being erased. Inside a whiteout, there is no up, no down, no shadow, no horizon, only a white that presses on your eyes and a wind that keeps changing which ear it screams in. We roped up on flat ground because Deke did not trust us to stay within 10 feet of each other otherwise, and he was right not to. Fitz counted paces off the compass bearing, while Marcy read the map through a sandwich bag, and I watched the rope at my waist and tried to keep it from ever going tight. Somewhere in the second hour, a gust put Marcy on her face, and the map survived, and her right mitten did not. A bare hand in January at 11,000 feet does not have all night, and we all knew the spare mitten math without saying it, one wool liner and a cut-up sock against the hours ahead. Deke got us off the crest and onto the lee slope, half navigation and half animal memory, and that is where the mountain handed us the one gift it meant to hand us. Fitz walked into a wall. Not rock, planks, grey boards weathered to the color of the cloud, and under his mittens, a bolted sign so scoured he had to read it with his fingertips. It was a firewatch cabin, the old kind the Forest Service kept staffed in fire season back, when people watched for smoke with binoculars, boarded up, and retired years before. The door had a hasp and a padlock, and the padlock was a lump of rust, and I will say plainly that Deke opened it with an ice axe, and none of us has ever lost a minute of sleep over that. We fell inside with the storm shoving at our backs, and Deke got the door wedged shut behind us, and for a second the quiet was so complete it rang. The room was 16 feet by 16, one open square, a plank floor, a tin counter along one wall, a chair with 3 legs, and a cast-iron stove squatting in the middle like a toad. The windows were plywood outside and glass inside, so what daylight was left came in as thin grey seams around the edges, and by 4 in the afternoon, the seams were going blue. There was a stove and nothing to burn in it, 3 swollen matches in a tin, and a chimney that some family of small things had packed solid with sticks and grass years ago. We ran a tent pole up the flue, and it went 2 feet and stopped like it had hit concrete. So that was that, no fire, not unless we wanted the smoke in the room with us. Out of the wind, which is the part that saves your life, and into the cold, which is the part that comes for it slower. Between the 4 of us, we had 2 sleeping bags dry enough to matter, because mine had drunk half the storm through a bad pack cover, and Marcy's had gone down the slope with her pack's lid. Sweat is the trap in winter, and all 4 of us had soaked ourselves getting off that crest, and wet cotton kills and wet wool just takes longer about it. The thermometer nailed by the door had quit at 10 below with its column split, and the wind reaching through the wall cracks made the exact number feel academic anyway. Marcy's right hand was the first order of business, and we got it skin to skin against Fitz's stomach while I cut the sock into a mitten, and she never once made a sound about any of it. Deke laid out the night for us the way he laid out roots, flat and unhurried. We would wring out what we could, rotate the 2 dry bags in shifts, eat the chocolate now and the cheese at midnight, and nobody, under any circumstances, was going to be allowed to sleep cold. Because that is the actual danger, and I will give it to you the way he gave it to us. The cold does not take you screaming, it takes you agreeing. You get sleepy warm, you get sure you are fine, you sit down for just a minute, and the minute keeps you. We had no fire, no dry clothes, and 9 hours of dark to cross, and 2 of us were already shivering in the jerky, skipping way that is a stage past the ordinary kind. Jumping jacks in wet clothes only make more sweat, and singing lasted about 40 minutes before the altitude took our voices. Somewhere around 7, with the window seams gone black and 1 candle lantern burning on the tin counter, Fitz's chin dropped to his chest for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Deke watched him jerk back awake, and I watched Deke, and I saw him arrive at something he did not like arriving at. He said his uncle's crews had a way of getting through watch shifts in cold places, a game, and that we were going to play it now, and that it worked best in the dark. Marcy asked why the dark, since we had a candle and nothing else on the agenda. Deke said your body will not let you doze standing up in the dark with a job to do, And then, more quietly, he said the game does not really start until the light is out. Here is the corner walk, as it was taught to us by a man whose uncle swore it was old when he learned it. You put one person in each corner of the room, facing in, backs to the angle, and you put out the light. One of you starts as the walker, and the walker keeps a hand on the wall and walks to the next corner around, always the same direction, and finds the shoulder of the person standing there. 2 knuckles, 1 tap, nothing fancy, and the tap means that corner belongs to you now. The one who was tapped steps out along the wall and becomes the new walker, around to the next corner, to the next shoulder, and so it goes, one walker moving at a time, around and around the room. If you are standing and you feel the tap, you move, and if you are walking and you find a shoulder, you stop, and the room stays quiet, because there is no talking while the walk is moving. And then, the only rule that matters. If you walk your wall to the end, and there is no shoulder in the corner, nothing, an empty angle, you stand into it, and you clap twice, loud. The clap says the walk is broken, and on the clap, everybody sounds off by name from wherever they stand, and then the clapper starts a new round. Fitz, being Fitz, saw the arithmetic before Deke had finished laying it out. With 4 people in 4 corners, the first walker leaves a hole behind them, and the hole travels around the room just ahead of the walk, and the 4th walker always finds it. Tap, 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 clap, that is 1 round. 4 people can never get further than that. The break is built in. The game is designed to fail. Marcy said it sounded like a stupid game, and Deke said correct. It is a stupid game the way a smoke alarm is a stupid song. The clap is the point, because the clap forces the roll call, and a roll call once a minute, all night, is 4 people proving their blood is moving and their ears are on. Fitz asked what happens if the clap does not come. I remember the pause before Deke answered, because the candle was between us, and I watched him decide how much of something to say. He said if a round runs long you wait, and if no clap comes and no tap comes to you either, then someone is down, asleep or worse, and you break the walk yourself and go find them. Then Marcy asked what it means if nobody is down, and the claps just stop coming while the taps go on. Deke was quiet a moment, and then he said that does not happen with 4, and his uncle's crews always played it with 4, and we were dropping the subject now. He said one more thing while we were feeling our way to our corners, in the voice people use for spilled salt. If the walk ever closes on you, do not stop it and do not put a light on it. You keep your corner and you keep walking until daylight, and you thank the room on your way out. We blew out the candle at 7:30 by Fitz's watch, and the dark came down on the room like a lid on a pot. I had the northeast corner, Deke the northwest, Marcy the southwest by the door, Fitz the southeast, and the dead stove held the middle of the floor where no wall would take you near it. You do not know dark until it is January inside a boarded box under a storm, and the wind was a river sound around us, and under it, the room began to make its own small sounds. Deke walked first. I heard his boots, that little squeak in the left one, 12 steps along the north wall, and then 2 knuckles landed on my shoulder, and I stepped out of a corner I was already calling mine. I walked my wall with my glove gliding over frost-furred planks, 12 steps, and found the wool of Fitz's shoulder right where the geometry promised it, and tapped, and stood into his angle. Fitz crossed the south wall and tapped Marcy, and Marcy walked the west wall into the northwest corner, where Deke was not, because Deke was standing behind me in the corner I had given up. 2 claps sharp as kindling splitting, then our names crossing the dark, Deke, Owen, Fitz, Marcy, and no roll call in any schoolroom ever sounded half that good to me. That is a round, and a round took about a minute, and for the first hour or more, the game worked exactly the way it was built to work. Tap, 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 clap, 4 names, and again, and the walker's job rotated through us in a pattern Fitz could probably have written out as a formula. It was not warm work, but it was work, feet moving, mind on the wall, and the trick of it dawned on me in that hour: you cannot doze inside it, because the game keeps handing you a task. Either you are standing with one ear out for boots, or you are walking with one hand full of wall, and both of those are wide, awake occupations. We settled in, and the storm leaned on the box, and the box held, and our little machine of taps and claps ticked around and around in the dark. Marcy started humming between her turns, low, something her mother used to sing, and since the walk technically stops at every clap, Deke let it go. I want to be honest about how it felt in that first stretch, because it matters for what came after. It felt good. It felt like a game in a summer basement, and at the same time like joining a watch that ran back through Deke's uncle to men we never knew, standing shifts in cold rooms. My shoulder learned the taps the way your ear learns footsteps on your own stairs. Deke tapped heavy, once, like a stamp coming down. Fitz used the flat of his fist because his knuckles were split from the cold, a soft thud, and Marcy always gave a quick light double. The stamp, the thud, the double, hold on to those 3 the way I had to. Around 9 we broke for the cheese, and a look at Marcy's hand by 1 candle minute, and her fingers took the light pink and angry, which is what you want, because angry means alive. Deke said 1 more shift until the chocolate, and somebody groaned the way you groan at an uncle's joke, and we felt our way back to our corners, and the light went out again. It was somewhere in that second shift that the game stopped being ours. I was standing in the southeast corner, Fitz's old angle, waiting on the walk, and the round ran long. Your body grows a clock for the rhythm, tap, 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 clap, about a minute, and the minutes stretched and nothing came, no boots, no clap, only the river of wind and my pulse ticking in my ears. The rules said wait, then break the walk and go find whoever was down, and I was drawing breath to call it when steps came down the east wall toward me, unhurried. 2 knuckles, light and patient, right on the point of my shoulder. Not the stamp, not the thud, not the double. I decided, inside half a second, that a tired man taps differently, and that it was Deke worn quiet, and I stepped out and walked my wall and found a shoulder and tapped it and stood still. The next round went tap, 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 clap, Marcy's clap, 4 names in the dark, everybody exactly where the arithmetic said they ought to be. So I let it go, the way anybody half frozen would have. 2 rounds later, the walk ran long again, and this time I counted, because when you are standing in the dark, counting is the only handrail there is. A leg of the walk takes about 15 seconds, and I stood through 5 legs worth, then 6, and in between I heard taps landing across the room, soft, evenly spaced, calm as a metronome. Taps without claps, that was the wrongness. The walk was going around and around, and nobody was ever finding the empty corner. I stood in my angle doing the subtraction, and I folded the answer up and put it away like a knife I did not want to carry open. Then Deke's voice cut through, low, calling break, and a match flared, and the roll was 4 names and 4 faces above 1 candle, and every one of those faces was grey. Fitz said the rounds were coming up wrong and said it in numbers, 7 taps since the last clap, when 4 people cannot make more than 3, and there was a hair in his voice I had never heard. Marcy said maybe two of us had walked at once, crossed in the dark, tangled the pattern, and Deke said sure, that will be it, in the voice of a man reading a card that was handed to him. We stood in the candlelight stamping our feet, and nobody said the other thing, and the cold told us to get on with it. I have to be fair to us here, because the cold was not the background of the decision we made next. The cold was the whole argument. Marcy's shivering had crossed from the jerky stage into the sleepy stage, which is the wrong direction, and Fitz's watch put the time at not even 10, with 8 hours of dark still on the meter. Stopping the game meant sitting in wet clothes doing frostbite arithmetic until somebody's chin dropped for good, and the game, whatever was off in its bookkeeping, was keeping 4 bodies upright. Deke blew out the candle and we took our corners. Into the dark he said, if your shoulder is tapped, take the walk and do the job and do not talk, and if the claps come short, let them come short. Walk until daylight, he said, and thank the room on the way out, and there was no half joke left anywhere in him when he said it. So we walked. I want to tell you what it was like from inside, because the night went by one leg at a time. You stand in your angle with the planks cold through 2 layers at your shoulder blades, and you listen, and the storm is so steady it stops being a sound and becomes a kind of pressure. Boots come down your wall, or sometimes only the faint creak of a hand traveling the boards, and you learn that the room has walkers who weigh something and one who does not. The tap comes and you go 12 steps, the wall feeding under your glove, log joints, a knot, cold nail heads, the little fur of frost that grows where breath has been freezing to wood for hours. You find wool or shell fabric or nothing, and if it is nothing you clap, and I did clap twice, somewhere around 11, when the southwest angle stood empty under my hand. 3 names answered me from 3 corners, Deke, Fitz, Marcy, prompt as school. And while Marcy's name was still crossing the room, 2 knuckles came down on the point of my shoulder, from in front of me, from inside the angle I was standing in. I did the job. I stepped out and walked my wall like a man carrying a 2-full cup, and at the next corner I found wool and tapped it, and I said nothing because the rules said nothing, and because I could not have. I have gone back and forth for 28 years about whether that was the moment to scream the roll, light the candle, end it all standing up. But Marcy was upright because the game kept tapping her upright, and daylight was the only door out of that room, and Deke had said walk, so I walked. Everyone, it turned out, was carrying a moment like mine and carrying it alone, but that belongs to the diner. Past midnight, the game changed its manners. The taps stopped being copies of ours and became one tap, its own, a tap with weight behind it and no hurry in it, the way a man taps a barometer he has owned for 30 years. The cold in the corners began to move. I do not mean drafts, I know drafts, I mean a corner would go cold from a center outward, the way water goes cold around a dropped stone, and the center sat at about the height of a shoulder. Marcy's humming had stopped at some point I could not name, and I missed it the way you miss a streetlight that has gone out above you. Fitz broke the no-talking rule once, near 1 in the morning, his voice very small, saying 4 taps between my walks, every time, and Deke came back flat as a closed book, walk anyway. I started counting my steps, because counting was a handrail and I needed one. 12 steps, every wall, all night, 12 from angle to angle with my glove riding the frost, and a man can hold himself together a long time as long as 12 stays 12. Deep in the small hours, the storm began to change register, the river sound developing a rasp, which Deke told us later was the wind swinging north, the beginning of the end of it. By then I had stopped feeling my face, and my shivering had gone quiet too, and I knew what that quiet meant, and I kept walking anyway, because the taps kept coming to move me. The cheese and the chocolate were long gone, eaten standing up at some corner in the dark, and I do not remember tasting either one. What I remember is the room getting bigger. That is not a sentence a sane man gets to say, so let me say it with my feet instead. The walls of that cabin stayed 12 steps long for hours, and then one of them did not. It was coming up on 4 in the morning, by the one time Fitz risked his watch light, when a tap moved me out along the north wall, and I walked my 12. 12 came, and the angle did not. The wall kept going under my glove, plank and joint and nail head. 13, 14, 16. My hand reaching ahead into more boards where the corner of a 16-foot room had to be. I stopped, and behind me on the wall I had just walked, something did not stop. A slow creak of boards taking weight and letting it go, coming on at exactly my pace. I did the only thing the game left me. I kept my hand on the wall and walked, 18, 20, 22, with that slow creak keeping step at my back. At 26 steps, my glove dropped into an angle, a corner that had no business being there, and there was a shoulder standing in it. Tall and very still, wool colder than the room, and wet the way nothing of ours was still wet, and I raised 2 knuckles and tapped it, because the tap was the rule, and the rule was all I had left. It gave under my knuckles the way a coat gives on a nail, cloth over nothing, and then the nothing shifted, unhurried, like a big man politely making room, and stepped out along the wall. No boots. Only that creak of a hand riding the boards away from me, down a wall that my own steps now told me was 12 steps long after all, and had been 12 steps long all night. I stood into the corner, and it was the northeast, my first corner, the one I had started the night in, and the cold in it settled over my shoulders like a coat being handed back. I do not know how long I stood there before the next tap moved me, a minute or a month, and the walk went on, and I went with it. The seams around the plywood turned from black to a gray you would only call light if you had spent 9 hours earning it. The storm had dropped to a long exhale, and the walk was still going, taps evenly spaced in the dark, and the 4 of us kept our corners like fence posts in a flood. Then, with the grey coming up bolder around the boards, there came a sound the room had not heard since 9:30 the night before. 2 claps. Sharp, deliberate, and from the middle of the room, from the open floor by the dead stove, where no corner is and no wall runs, and none of us in 9 hours had once had reason to stand. The roll call was a debt, and Deke paid it first, his voice a ruin, and then me and Fitz and Marcy, 4 names from 4 corners, while the middle of the room said nothing back. The clap is the signal a walker gives when the walk delivers them to an empty corner. All 4 of our corners were spoken for, 4 voices from 4 angles, and I have never worked out which corner it was reporting empty, and I have stopped letting myself try. What I believe is simple enough. The game was over, and something was keeping the rules to the very end, and the rules say you announce the break. Nobody moved for a long time after that. Light grew in the seams until we could see each other as grey shapes. 4 of them, 4 corners, a dead stove, an empty floor, a room holding nothing that had not walked in with us. Deke crossed to the door on legs I could hear misfiring, put his hand on the latch, then stopped, turned back to the room, and said thank you plainly, like a man paying at a counter. He made each of us say it out loud before he would lift that latch, and in 28 years, I have never once teased him about it, because all four of us had heard what stood the watch with us. The morning outside was blue and bitter and enormous, wind-carved snow glowing pink along the crests, and the silence out that door was the honest kind, with nothing standing in it. We did not talk on the way down. We came down the lee slope with the crust squeaking, roped the first hour out of habit or the need of the rope's company, and by early afternoon we struck the plowed county road. A rancher hauling hay took pity on 4 grey scarecrows, and by 3 we were in a diner in a valley town I will not name either, holding coffee with hands that would not be casual about it. It was Marcy who finally did it, with a pencil from her map bag on the back of a paper placemat. She drew a square and 4 dots in the corners, and she walked the dots the way the game walks people, and then she set the pencil down like it had grown hot in her hand. For the walk to close, she said, every corner has to stay full while one person is on the wall, and you can count it on one hand, 4 corners full plus a walker is 5. 5 bodies, she said, every minute the claps did not come, and the claps did not come from 10 until dawn, and then nobody at that table said anything for a while. Fitz said quietly into his coffee, 4 taps between my walks, 3 hours of it, it never varied once, and a rotation of 5 is the only pattern that gives you 4. And then it all came out in that booth, in the low voices people keep for private weather in public places, each of us laying down the piece we had carried through the night alone. Deke had felt, on 3 separate walks, a hand travel the wall toward him and pass behind his neck and go on, while the only walker the taps allowed for was across the room. Marcy had stood one entire round with breathing at her right shoulder, patient as a horse at a fence, and she had hummed at it, she said, because humming was the only thing she had left to hold. That is why the humming stopped when it did, and I would give a fair amount back to not know that. And I told them about my clap at the empty southwest corner, the 3 names that answered, and the 2 knuckles that came down on my shoulder from inside the angle I was already standing in. Fitz, who does not say such things, said, it took the empty corner every round that was its seat. We dealt it in the moment we put out the light. Marcy asked Deke whether his uncle's crews had truly played it with 4, and what the game had been for in the beginning, before it was for keeping watch. Deke looked into his coffee for a long time. He said his uncle only ever told him one thing sideways, once, after a funeral, that the game was not invented, it was learned, and that the men who learned it did not learn it from men. Then he said the other thing, that in all the cold rooms it had ever been played in, the game had never once lost the man it was keeping awake. I have carried those 2 sentences for 28 years, like 2 stones in the same pocket, and I have never set either one down. Whatever stood the 5th corner, that night kept 4 half-frozen kids on their feet through 9 hours that were fixing to kill us, and it took its turns fair, and it tapped soft. It took nothing from us that I can point to, and it said goodbye in the only grammar it had, and some nights that is a comfort, and some nights it is the worst part of the whole thing. We did not stop climbing together, the 4 of us, but we never again went out as 4 in winter, and nobody ever said why out loud, because nobody had to. Deke lives in Arizona now, somewhere flat and hot on purpose, and the spring after that trip he sold me his whole winter rack, and I never resold a piece of it. It sits in a tub under my stairs. Marcy runs the overnight shift in an emergency room 2 states away, by her own choice, and her desk faces the door, and she once introduced me to a co-worker as the man she stood a watch with. Fitz builds bridges, or the math for bridges, and at his 50th birthday party his wife told me, laughing, that he claps twice in every dark room he walks into, and that he always has. None of us has ever played it again, and when a scout leader in my shop mentioned a corner game for cold camps, I sold him a lantern at cost and told him to burn it all night instead. Deke called me 2 winters ago, late, 10 o'clock at night, which is not an hour he calls at. He had been to another funeral, his uncle's youngest brother, the last of that generation of watchstanding men, and he had sat up afterward with the old man's effects and found a notebook. The game was in it, written out in pencil, the corners, the walk, the tap, the clap, the roll call, all of it the same as we had it in the cabin. And at the bottom of the page, in the same pencil, there was one line his uncle had never once said out loud in all the years he taught it, and the line was, "It plays best with 4." Deke read it to me over the phone, and neither of us said anything for a good while, and then he said, "Well," and I said, "Yeah," and that is the whole of what 2 grown men had for it. I am 53, and I have a good shop in a good town, and I still love winter in the high country, and I want that said plainly, because this is not about hating the mountains. But the last customer on a winter night sometimes finds me back by the boot wall, and if they come up quiet on the carpet and tap my shoulder, 2 knuckles, light and patient, I need a second. I set down whatever I am holding, so they do not see my hands, and I count 1 breath the way I once counted steps. Then I turn, and there is a person there, an ordinary person with a face and a parka and boots to try on, and I could shake their hand for a solid minute out of plain relief. My shop is an old building, and the lamp in the back corner burns all night, every night, and I pay that bill without complaining. 12 steps is a distance my legs still know in the dark, and as long as no tap finds my shoulder in an empty room, the game is holding its break, and all of us are just standing our shifts. But if it ever comes, when the shop is closed and the corners are dark, I will not turn around to look, because looking was never part of the game. I will set down whatever I am holding and put my hand on the wall and walk.